Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises has often been considered the weakest of the trilogy, and also one of Nolan's weakest films. Although it would be towards the bottom of my Nolan list, I think the film at times has been unfairly judged as an individual film. Now sure, it was coming off the back of one of the greatest films of all time in regards to many viewers' reactions, but the film equally has its own powerful messages and can stand on its own 2 feet, even if it doesn't quite reach the standard of the previous film. It's all subjective when it comes to critiquing this, but I've always been impressed by the film's long-lasting effect and overall intent. In this video, I'm going to be analysing the symbolic and emotional closure in The Dark Knight Rises, making it a satisfying ending to a consistent and impactful trilogy. This video essay continues my Christopher Nolan Marathon, where I create content on every film in the director's filmography, including Tenet when it releases later this month. To stay up to date with all of this content, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoy it, remember to leave a like rating. Without further ado, let's dive into the symbolic and emotional closure of The Dark Knight Rises. Nolan's films are very clearly an examination of how symbols are bigger than individuals when it comes to time. And when exploring the symbolic impact of Batman, we see that The Dark Knight Rises makes this a major aspect. There are several new characters, most notably Joseph Gordon-Levitt's John Blake, which are introduced for the sole purpose of demonstrating the impact Bruce's actions had on a younger generation. Just like Bruce Wayne's perception in the film, I saw only one end to the character's journey, and I think this was Nolan's intention. At the start of this final chapter, we've spent 2 films situated squarely inside Bruce's psyche, and since he sees no other ending to his story than dying for his cause, this is the fate we predict for him as well. What Bruce fails to realise is that in giving himself over entirely to what he fights for, he may lose himself in the process. This is, in hindsight, the only natural place Nolan would take the character for a last instalment. His fascination with Batman has always been the deeper psychology behind the character, the mental and emotional anguish that would compel a person to dress up like a bat and abuse their body to the limits of human potential every night. The film ultimately poses a question that had to be asked. What would leading a brutal double life take on the human soul? The realistic cost would be a large climb. At the outset of The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce Wayne is a broken man. He has put too much stock into Batman to ever lead a normal life again, and after retiring the cowl, he has only the pain and sorrow of past mistakes and personal demons to keep him company. Bruce's soul is in decay, and with Rachel dead, he sees no clear path back into the light and no connection to humanity. And if the man who is meant to be a hero, the guardian of an entire city, loses his own sense of humanity, what is he? If his soul has been shattered and the lives of those closest brought down with him, what has he left to fight for? Bruce created Batman to make people better, to protect and empower the citizens of his beloved Gotham. But can he protect the humanity of others if the collapse of his own soul is eating him alive? Can he inspire hope if he has none left for himself? Alfred warned Bruce of this eventuality over and over again in the first 2 films. Alfred spent much of Batman Begins urging his metaphorical son not to leave Bruce Wayne behind entirely, to invest in his own spirit as much as he does the spirit of Batman or of Gotham. But Bruce did not listen, and in The Dark Knight, it is clear that Batman has consumed him. The consequences of these actions do not become clear until The Dark Knight Rises, but the foreshadowing is heavy. Alfred compels Bruce to know his limits, but Bruce is far too deep to have any, and Rachel finally abandons her childhood, knowing that a time will no longer come when you don't need Batman. Rachel and Alfred are both correct. Bruce has invested too much in Batman to walk away with his spirit intact. He reached his limits and then pushed forward until he chained his soul in a dark, lonely prison of his own sins. The real tragedy is that for the good he has done for Gotham, Bruce's personal corrosion is reflected in the city he loves so much. Organised crime may be gone, but its impending death was predicted on a lie. By taking the fall for Harvey Dent's crimes, Bruce corrupted Batman and, worse, failed to heal the wounds the Joker inflicted on the fabric of Gotham. 8 years later, they are impossible to ignore, just as the reclusive Bruce is unable to deny how far he has fallen. Thus, the story of The Dark Knight Rises, the arc of Bruce Wayne's final journey, a journey which involves healing the spiritual collapsing of himself and the city he protects. Alfred believes Bruce has it within himself to change, and he is the first character in the film to suggest that Bruce would be best served by rising above his inner darkness. The staggering emotional impact of Michael Caine's work in this film goes far beyond any previous interpretation of the character, and of every attempt Nolan has made to bring Batman into our world, I think Alfred has to be praised as the most visible human connection. He is not just the stereotypical voice of reason, nor Nolan's sounding board for thematic points. He fulfills both of these functions, but also many more, all while remaining recognisably and profoundly human. Alfred's departure in the film creates a significant mental battle, not just for Bruce, but for the audience. There is a certain ingrained, comfortable structure to how Alfred appears throughout Nolan's movies, and when he is gone, his absence is deeply felt. It's like there's a dark, empty hole at the heart of the story, one that is impossible to ignore. Alfred is our greatest connection to humanity in this trilogy, but we don't quite recognise his importance until he is gone. That is, of course, Alfred's goal in leaving. If he can't get Bruce to re-examine his life choices, maybe his absence can. With no one left to turn to, perhaps Bruce will finally look inward. But Bruce still has his Batman persona to turn to. He retreats behind the cowl even further than before, embarking on a truly reckless mission to find Bane. Given what Bruce knows about his enemy and what relatively little time he spent training his body for the confrontation, it's Bruce's arrogance as much as Bane's ruthlessness that leads to Bane breaking the bat. Yet, in the film's darkest bit of irony, it's Bane's brutality that, in the long run, leads to Bruce's salvation. By breaking his body, Bane robs Bruce of Batman, the last escape he could hang on to, and in the horrible pit Bane leaves him in, Bruce has nothing to rely on but himself. Not Batman, not Alfred, not even Gordon. He is truly, utterly alone, with nothing to focus on but his own fractured spirit, symbolised by a broken body. He must strengthen, heal, and come to a deeper understanding of both body and mind if he is to rise from the darkness and return triumphant. Every climb Bruce makes is a metaphor for his human spirit, the first being desperation, the second anger, and the final one that propels him out of the cell, which is fear. This was the very first theme introduced in Nolan's trilogy. Bruce once used fear as his fuel. It was the very inspiration behind Batman. But over the course of his journey, Bruce lost hold of his greatest fear, and that fear in turn took hold of him. But once he overcomes this, he rises. He returns stronger, healthier, and more importantly, complete, perhaps for the first time since his parents' murder. It is in the pit that Bruce synthesizes the many dying aspects of his personality into one unified identity. These are the experiences that simmered in Bruce's heart over the 8-year gap leading to The Dark Knight Rises. Living with this guilt, which is another common Nolan theme, it robbed Bruce of his faith in himself and in Batman. The fear returned not as power, but as a crippling, blinding inability to see the light. It's only when Bruce realises this that he is able to make the climb. This is how his soul heals, and this is how he is able to rebuild his identity from the ground up. First as Bruce Wayne, then as Batman, and finally as a symbol to Gotham. Each identity must be grown collectively rather than individually for Bruce to rise above the darkness. Rise he does out of the pit and back to Gotham, where Batman saves the city, rehabilitates his image, and inspires the people out of their apathy. This all takes place in the wartime environment Nolan crafts for the final film, where Batman Begins portrayed a heavy neo-noir approach, and The Dark Knight infused a bigger essence towards the crime and thriller genres. The Dark Knight Rises is set within the mould of the war genre, while still staying central to its spiritual uplifting of Batman and Bruce. We see this from across the board with the context of an apocalyptic setting, the wintry and empty streets of Gotham, the militarised presence of Bane and his army, alongside the more physical focus on action which culminates in a war between the criminals and the Gotham City police. Here we also see many of the characters' connections to Batman as a thematic symbol. Selina Kyle is almost about to leave the city and ignore the part of herself which she also needs to overcome. But in the end, her choice is one that redeems her, even if her life is extremely on the line. On the other side of things, Bane and Talia want to destroy Batman and Gotham as symbols, finishing the job that Ra's al Ghul couldn't execute. This wartime environment and character reflection creates not just the epic scope, but it heightens the emotional weight that is placed on all of the individual characters, stemming from Bruce Wayne himself. Of course, the people of Gotham do see Batman die, but he died for them, and those who knew the Dark Knight's identity mourn for him as Bruce Wayne. But Batman's actions are not forgotten, and he does indeed become the symbol of hope, unity, and progress that Bruce intended him to be. Gotham erects a statue in Batman's honour, and the bat signal is restored at the GCPD headquarters. But the clearest example of Batman's legacy is character-based, woven into the very fabric of The Dark Knight Rises through Officer John Blake and the at-risk boys' home he protects. Blake is an essential character, for he represents what Batman's actions have meant to a younger generation. As a boy, Blake would have grown up without the healing power of hope, were it not for Batman's presence, and he follows in the Dark Knight's footsteps in more ways than one over the course of the film. It is fitting that Nolan ends his trilogy by allowing Blake, one of these younger people inspired by Batman, to literally ascend as Batman's successor. It proves that Batman's legacy will never be forgotten. The torch shall be carried literally by Blake, and figuratively by the people of Gotham who owe their lives to the Dark Knight. Batman has become something bigger than Bruce Wayne, and Gotham will be better for it. In this sense, Bruce and Batman both died as heroes, and they will be remembered as such. Batman's legacy is safe. The symbol will continue to do good for Gotham, especially in John Blake's hands. Batman is bigger than Bruce Wayne now, and as such, Bruce has the ability to do what he once promised Rachel: to leave Batman behind and simply live his life. It's a promise he must keep, not just to her but to Alfred. As Batman said at the end of The Dark Knight, the people deserve to have their faith rewarded, and by simply getting on with his life alongside Selina Kyle, who is another lost soul in need of a fresh start, Bruce fulfills these promises. It may be a radical departure from our typical concept of who Batman is, but in my mind, if Bruce didn't leave Batman behind at the end of the film, a trilogy with this kind of development would have been for nothing. And of course, to move on in the context of Alfred's dream by running into Bruce on vacation, happy and content with a family of his own, it portrays an emotionally fulfilling conclusion. As I said earlier, Alfred is the series' most profound human touchstone, and after a long, difficult journey, Bruce Wayne has finally joined him. As a human being, he is complete. But let me know down below what your thoughts are towards the symbolic and emotional closure of The Dark Knight Rises. My next video in this Christopher Nolan marathon focuses on Interstellar. I will be analysing how the film differs from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey through human evolution. This video will be up in the next few days, alongside much more content on the director's extended filmography coming soon. To stay up to date with this series along with videos on Tenet once the film releases, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a like rating. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.